All right, we're now going live. Welcome to Dorsey's Resource. Testing one, two. Okay, we got everything good. The title of this video is going to be What Black History Documentaries Won't Reveal, a Massive Cover Up. I intend to go over something I felt from watching a lot of documentaries because February is Black History Month, and I want to at least get a video in. This is not the video that I had intended to do yet on reparations. For down the road, maybe in the near future. I had been intending to for quite a while, but I wanted to give my weigh in. And once again, the topic of this video is going to be what Black history documentaries won't reveal, a massive cover up. But first, before we get started, I'm going to give a disclaimer. This video is for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Please understand everyone's individual circumstance or situation may be different. It's up to every individual competent person to please do his or her own homework and research regarding the matter being discussed. This information is not to be construed as legal advice. These are simply my opinions on the said topic. With that being said, all rights are reserved. Now let's get into this. Once again, I have some notes prepared for me. I wanted to talk about I had saw a documentary and something that I felt was missing that a lot of not all, but a significant portion of his Black historians out there, some that claim to be that do documentaries, docuseries, oftentimes leave this critical aspect of Black history out. And I've actually met with someone I consider an expert. That's the level equivalent of a five-star historian, someone that's very knowledgeable in the past, someone that has actually been overseas. Now, I myself personally have not been over to Africa where to visit the pyramids, but this individual that had been not only uh, shared this with me through sworn testimony, but he also showed me different archives of videotapes that he had at the time of the tour that he went over. And I was comparing notes because he is someone that is more knowledgeable than myself. So I want to let you guys know the information that I go over is going to be highly accurate. It's very well researched. I am very well studied to a degree. Now there are people that I'm a humble person. I give those who are more having more advanced knowledge, and there's a lot of layers to unpack on this particular topic. But I felt this is something important. The majority of a lot of documentaries that I saw out there don't talk about this, even when reparations are brought up. A lot of times I see there's an undertone that this particular documentary that I saw recently, I'm going to try to see if I can get the name. It was a good documentary. However, it failed to point out some historical truths. I actually bookmarked this, some very important historical truths dealing with our Black history and why there is a cover up that this oftentimes is particularly is not addressed. And one of the things to get right into the meat and potatoes is the a lot of people, a lot of Black people who vote Democrat are not aware. And even myself, until a couple years ago, I was like unsure until I had a friend who I used to would debate with quite a bit, who is a Republican. And I myself, I'm personally not a registered voter. He is of African American descent. And we would have discussions a lot, a very fair way. We're not to the point we would get, like a lot of other people get very personal, like when you watch these debates on mainstream television, people that get what's called triggered. With us, we still good friends at the end of the day. We've talked about we're not going to let, our differences, you know, put us, break up our friendship, things of that sort. People, oftentimes this can be, this particular topic can be very, I'm trying to think of the right word, with a lot of people, offensive, can get offended by because people double down in their belief systems. But keep in mind that the information is this is subjective. as well. But this is based off of accurate research, and I researched this myself and found out what he was sharing with me was accurate upon doing further investigation. I used to be a Democrat years ago, up until I canceled my voter registration in the year of 2004. I had grown up for just being part of Black culture. By the way, just to give a little background about myself, where Black History Month was taught in all the schools I attended, even when I went to a private Christian school at the time. The topic was acknowledged. It was covered. I can't remember all the specifics when I did transfer to the private Christian school. However, there was the majority that of students that went there were African American, over 90% at the time. In elementary school, I was taught about Black history and different pioneers. So I just want to first of all also give credit to all those people that have played a role, no matter what political party they were affiliated with, they belonged to. They helped bring about change in some type of way. Rest in peace to all the greats. So many to name out there. I won't go through the list right now, but obviously, of course, the pioneers, Dr. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Malcolm El Haj Shabazz, Medgar Evans, members of the Black Panther Party. Who can I think of? It's like I say, so many. Rosa Parks, Harriet Tubman, so many to name. I just can't, go through the list. But but to get right to the meat and potatoes, a lot of Black people don't know the Democratic Party. I found out from research created the Ku Klux Klan. They were the ones that voted for the Jim Crow laws and also created the Black codes. By the way, it wasn't the Republican Party, it was the Democratic Party. And I found out that this was on congressional record in 1882. Democratic Party took responsibility for creating the KKK on congressional record in 1882. Now, one has to do their own research, just like this is why I give a disclaimer. This might be triggering for some. This is why I feel I needed to cover this topic. A lot of documentaries that I watched don't point this out. They blame the Republican Party for all the problems, or a lot of the problems in the Black community. And I'm not saying you have problems on each side. Yes, you do. And there's those that will say, well, Dorsey, they're two heads of the same snake. I've heard that argument that they've both been captured. Now, I would say to add to that argument, that is true in a sense when you bring in the establishment, or what some refer to as the deep state, or I refer to as the criminal cabal, global syndicate, or ruling class has an establishment base where they, of course, have infiltrated and control both sides. But when you have outsiders, that's a whole nother aspect to get into specifically, where there's people that truly try to bring about change that are not bought off by donors and high net worth people, and things that actually try to bring about change for the people, and that actually mean well, by the way. So I wanted to go into some of the history. uh, I've got a lot of notes compiled. That's This particular document I'm reading from is not organized in a way. To a degree, it is, but there's some things I would say is neither here nor there. But there were racist white liberals who wanted to control Black people's outcome through a long-term agenda, and many Black people were tricked when, after Martin Luther King worked with Lyndon Baines Johnson after John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I found out they still wanted to honor Kennedy by passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And many Black people were tricked into receiving the entitlement programs, which Lyndon Baines Johnson supported and is famous quoting on record, "I'll have those N-words voting Democrat for the next 200 years." I've even had liberals admit this to me. They were familiar with that quote from Lyndon Baines Johnson, by the way. That is a fact. You can look it up. Some of this information I'm going to let you guys know. Too, there's also a massive cover up because the Democratic Party of today, I found even in years past when Obama was president, that the Democratic National Convention, I guess they had their own records. they covered up records about a Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard speaking at the Democratic National Convention years ago. They went back, and this wasn't a long time ago in history. Oftentimes, Republicans are blamed as the ones, but I say the onus overall is more so on the Democratic Party, which some black people, a lot of black people feel they have black people back more so than the Republican Party is. You know, there's been a stereotype for years where they say the Republicans are for the rich, Democrats are for the poor. But Democrats also, what they don't go into details about, once you control, they want you on these programs today. Back then, they would call it entitlement programs, which some can call today. They're under different names. You know, with the Democratic Party. By the way, the one thing Democrats also fear is a free thinking black man. Joe Biden and other Democrats supported the 1994 crime bill that sent a lot of black men to prison. Even as he, you know, came into office, there's a lot of black people that still look over this and feel, from their perspective, they feel he's the lesser of two evils, or they felt from their perspective he's the better option, but they've never held him accountable, and many other Democrats, for what they did for over 100 years, specifically dealing with the Jim Crow laws and the black codes, which were separate very similarly. They were voted on. You can look this up and research it as far back as the late 1800s. After slavery, they wanted a way to retaliate, and a way that they never wanted black people at the time after slavery to have economic power. That's why the period of Reconstruction was shortened. They never properly addressed the damage. They never properly repaired the damage. That's why I support reparations, because black people, melanated people in this country, African Americans, cannot inherit food stamps, these entitlement programs, or assistance. There's a specific agenda why generational wealth is not being passed down. That is true. Why there is a major wealth gap. A lot of this has to do, does go to the not only the transatlantic slave trade, but laws after slavery that were passed, that were created to keep blacks in their place, basically, from owning anything. Another way to cripple African Americans, and this was implemented by the Democratic Party, which controlled the South. There was also a party within the Democratic Party referred to as the Dixiecrats. This is why, if you're traveling to Maryland, which I've gone a couple times with this elder, I've noticed, and I heard about this years ago, but I actually remember witnessing, there's a sign called the Mason-Dixon sign. And that's a friend of mine from Maryland, from that area, helped explain to me some years ago, and I looked it up. It represents like a dividing line between the North and the South. When you're heading from North, you're taking certain, don't quote me, I don't know the exact freeway, because the elder I was with is very knowledgeable, even brought a map with us at the time. Even though we already had GPS technology, they were still, you know, from the old school, and I appreciate the knowledge and things they shared with me. A lot of those things are important, we take for granted. By the way, we're so used to using technology, the GPS, but they had actual map. And I remember seeing the sign that said Mason-Dixon line. And I remember hearing about a party called the Dixiecrats. By the way, from the little bit of research I was able to pull up, they appear to be, and some others alleged, a party within the Democratic Party. Remember, the Democrats, they were the Confederacy. By the way, if many of you all don't know, and if they say that there was, when they talk about this big switch, Tiffany Cross and others who used to work for MSNBC were wrong when she tried to say years ago that those Democrats were today are the Republicans, and that is not true. Yes, a significant portion of white people, Caucasian people, did switch over to the Republican Party, but they don't tell you about there is a lot of white liberals that control and ran the Democratic Party in their own respective jurisdictions. Some years ago, Project Veritas did an undercover investigation and showed and revealed this to pastors down south. And specifically, don't quote me, in the state of North Carolina, South Carolina. James O'Keefe interviewed a pastor. I believe it was when Trump first ran in his first term, when he was going against Hillary, to point out, and a lot of African Americans also do not know, and I know this to be a fact, you can look this up, Hillary and Al Gore separately had Confederate pins and other logos to appeal to Southerners in the South who were Democrats. By the way, remember there was this whole thing, years ago with the cancel culture. They banned the Confederate flags and logos, but they cover up. Don't tell you that's not a Republican thing. That originated from the Democratic Party, who also created the Ku Klux Klan. A lot of documentaries don't go into details explaining this, that specifically was the Democratic Party, by the way. And even as example I give, you can look this up as well. When Hillary was campaigning and Al Gore at different times, not only in the 90s, but even when Hillary was going against Trump, she had her own version. See, demographically, they can keep things compartmentalized to keep things hidden. And because they control the mainstream media, they didn't really pick this up. Now, there was a story that was picked up when Obama was running that the Ku Klux Klan at the time, it was a rumor, but it turned out to be true from researching it, preferred Obama to be president at the time because they didn't want a woman. And even though Obama was, to them, they still considered a minority, still considered black beneath them, they rather have him as a man versus Hillary, by the way. So that's why that article was actually true. I found out that there was members of the Ku Klux Klan that supported Obama, and they swept this under the rug because these type of taboo subjects that are like the elephant in the room do not help when it comes around election time and the Democrats are trying to get votes. They're trying to win their base over and things. So what I'm kind of going over is like, this is a taboo subject. This is the elephant in the room. But there was articles, and this was actually brought up and talked about. But there was also a media blackout or cover up. When they get a hold of certain things, then they shut the story down because they don't want it to become widespread. They also don't want, as I went over earlier, a black man or black people to be free thinking. They want to keep you locked in, basically, on their agenda. They want to control the narrative, by the way. Joe Biden was also good friends with a former plantation owner who owned a plantation by the name of James Eastland, some refer to as Jim Eastland, who was don't quote me exactly, I have to research it again, but I believe he was a former governor of Mississippi. And Mississippi, a lot of Democrats don't know. This is oftentimes not pointed out in the documentaries, that Republicans get accused of creating the Jim Crow laws and the black codes. No, that's not true. That was the Democratic Party. And this is a historical fact. Also, if you're not aware, Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington were Republicans, by the way. And Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, by the way, were registered as Republicans, even though behind the scenes, they were doing things to work with the Democrats, very similar in the opposite fashion, how Dr. Ben Carson was working with Trump, by the way, who was a Republican, by the way. And there's a reason why a lot of black Americans switched over to the Democratic Party during the 60s. They felt Kennedy was looking out for them more so from their perspective back then. If you put yourself in the shoes of black people, they felt collectively they still didn't trust the white man in their eyes, but they felt as though Kennedy was looking out more so for their interests. That's why what happened, why the majority of a significant portion of black people left the Republican Party. And then when the entitlement programs were passed, the legislation of 1964, which Martin Luther King at the time was working with Kennedy, but remember he had gotten assassinated, and Lyndon Baines Johnson took over as president. But we also remember, before King was assassinated, he went against the establishment, and this was on record. There's documentaries that talked about this. And Martin Luther King, by the way, supported reparations. There's a lot of white people that like to quote, Caucasian people that like to quote Martin Luther King, but this is a fact that's important. If you don't know, there's a video that's circulating around, has been on Facebook. You can still possibly find it on YouTube. Don't remember the name of it, but I saw it multiple times. I know many of you probably already have, that are aware of this history. Where Martin Luther King supported reparations. He even started something referred to as the Poor People's Project, and quoted on record before he was murdered that, "I'm afraid I'm leading my people into a burning house." And he started speaking against the Vietnam War. Lyndon Baines Johnson started calling him the N-word preacher, just like he referred to after he made a quote when he signed that legislation, because, you know, a lot of white Caucasian people were upset during that tumultuous time period of the 1960s. By the way, but there's images you can pull up online still with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which they said didn't address the Voting Rights Act. I'm not the foremost authority on that. One has to do more research, but Lyndon Baines Johnson is known, did quote on record, allegedly, that I'll have those N words voting Democrat for the next 200 years, because they knew that down the road they used certain entities, the Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, funded the feminist group. They saw that black men and women were marching together during the civil rights movement, so they wanted to break that apart, the unity. And what happened, there was something that I will acknowledge, that oftentimes this is not addressed and this is untold in documentaries, along with the title of this video, that isn't addressed or admitted, because it makes black people that feel look bad. But we have to admit the areas where we mess up at. When we pass integration, the elder pointed out that when we were segregated, we were forced to stick together more so. But one of the problems that happened when we did have our own businesses in different areas across the country, the problem was when integration, when the legislation, everything was passed, we abandoned our black businesses. This was brought up. I was seeing a brief documentary about Idlewild that MSNBC had aired, and there was a lady in the documentary. It appears as though she had addressed this or brought it up briefly when Lester Hall on NBC Nightly News had covered a place referred to as Black Eden, because years ago blacks were not allowed. This was like if you've heard of Idlewild, it's a resort that it was an area that allowed black people, minorities at the time, to go to have a good time, because we weren't allowed to go other places. And some famous people came up there. They have like a museum, by the way, and every year there's a group of people or activists that go up there, and there's those that are trying to purchase land, which I think is a good thing, by the way, for blacks to try to grow their wealth together and practice group economics and have something to try to pass down, because a lot of these things, some of these things that I'm covering, but I wanted you to know and understand the reason why you do have some blacks, African Americans, that vote or switched over to the Republican Party, is they know some of this history, just a little bit that I've covered. And this is just portions. There's other aspects that I haven't gotten into yet or covered, and they decide to become independent because you have members of the Democratic Party that don't acknowledge this, but now they appear to be, in some instances, I do see where, to be fair, where they do try to help in certain instances. But it depends on where you're at demographically, because different cities, different states have their own laws, have their own rules, but there are consistencies with a lot of places that are democratically ran. But there's a reason behind, why black people, a significant portion, are in the condition that they're in. By the way, I'm going to get to some other aspects. I want to go into details about. I'm going over some notes that I have. Some areas I won't touch on because I don't think it's related. It's not related. Some of it is somewhat sort of related to the topic, but I don't want to try to trigger any people, but some people may get triggered anyway, by the way. But I wanted to cover, dealing with this video, the topic was going to be, scroll down again. The topic of this video, once again, I was going over what Black history documentaries won't reveal, a massive cover-up. By the way, the main thing, I really didn't want this video to be that long. I just wanted to come before you guys, you all, and give my weigh in, by the way. And this is not the related to the video I had intended to do on reparations, which that would be more specifically geared towards that topic, by the way. And I actually I have some notes prepared already from years ago, by the way. I wanted to go cover this area this other area. So just bear with me here, by the way. These notes that I'm reading from are up to 55 pages long from different segments of comments and articles that I've compiled together. Okay, we're getting a little bit closer. Okay. Here's another problem. I had a discussion with a sister who follows my channel, and we had both agreed the problem is there's too many different factions within these victimhood struggle movements that don't agree with the other's ideology. For example, you have Black Hebrew Israelites that feel they have the correct way. You have the Moorish Science Temple. You have other factions of the Moors. You have the Nation of Islam that has their perspective. You have Christians who have a different perspective of how things should be addressed. So people have their own agendas, so they pick and choose what they want to address. This way people are looking for excuses sometimes, but don't address or cover what's going on. The problem is nobody is being purely righteous. There's a lot of double standards. There's hypocrisy. But what I'm going over, I've got some other powerful information on standby, and I've gone over some of this information in the past. By the way, one of the books I recommend is called "The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews," put out by the Nation of Islam's historical research department. Once again, there was a part one. I have personally I purchased parts 1 and 2, but there's a PDF file. If you do research online, a lot of it they tried to cover it up. Even when I covered this topic in the past, there was those that doubled down and they stopped selling the books on certain platforms. But there's a lot of powerful information, and as the elder, this historian that I know who's been overseas, who was vetted very well, is very well studied, and can prove. He's even shared that Caucasian Jews or Hasidic Jews, rabbis have admitted and written a lot of these things in their own writings. They just don't come out publicly and share it with you. And what happened was the Nation of Islam's research department, how they gathered this information, they went to synagogues and Jewish libraries from Hasidic Jews, Caucasian Jews, where they admitted in their writings where they were involved in the transatlantic slave trade. And I have some information that's even more powerful than what I'm going over, where I can even show a screen capture, by the way. But I encourage always everyone to do their own homework and do their own research, by the way, because there's a lot of damning information how they played a role in keeping Black communities from growing, and things of that sort that they played a part. Okay. All right. I'm looking for the part specifically for those that say Republicans and Democrats are both two heads of the same snake. You should judge them by the fruits they bear. Biden has been in politics for a long, very long time, and you have to ask, what has he accomplished all these years he's been in office? Just asking, by the way. And I'm going to skip this part, something about Black Lives Matter, but I feel it's not relevant at the time. There's another part that if you go back 100 years in the history of the Democrats' involvement, which I went over earlier, and starting the KKK, voting for the Jim Crow laws, Democrats also attempted re-enslaving Black people. Remember, the Republicans were the abolitionists that fought to end slavery. And I found out, and I'm aware of the history about Abraham Lincoln, that he really didn't want to free the slaves, but he did it to preserve the Union and things like that. I'm aware of that aspect. I won't go into all the details, but what those from the documentaries also don't reveal, and this untold truth, this cover up, is that, and they may not even be aware, but I researched this, by the way, and this has been vetted out even by the History Channel, a documentary they put out not too long ago. I read the entire article, and I even came across this before. There was a party that Lincoln was part of before they formed the Republican Party. The Republican Party was also formed out of the necessity that Democrats were terrorizing black and white sympathizers at the time, because they were lynched too. The Democratic Party. This documentary that I saw, who they did lean more to the Democrats, that it was good overall. But I'm pointing out, and I can get the name for you guys later. I bookmarked it. I just found it again earlier before I did this video. So this information I'm going over is highly accurate, but there was a documentary. Your brother, he did a real good job, but he failed to point out the Democratic Party's involvement in creating the black codes. And the state of Mississippi, in case you're not aware, created their own specific version of the black codes. That plantation owner that Joe Biden was good friends with, you can look him up, James Eastland, by the way. He was a Democrat. He was not a Republican. The New York Times, or one of the articles, put out fabricated lies, which they do on a cover up, and said he was James Eastland was a Republican. You know that Jim is the nickname for James, so his name was James Eastland. You can look him up, who he was, and why the state of Mississippi still has the policies and things that they have today. You can read between the lines. I'm painting the picture for you. This will help you connect the dots, and even Democrats who do not receive this information very well, and older liberals who are baby boomers who get triggered, by the way, this will help them connect the dots. But once again, I also found out, and you can research this yourself, you can investigate this. The Democrats within the state of Mississippi created their own specific version of the black codes. Black codes were similar to the Jim Crow laws. Legislation, if you look up separately, were both voted on in the late 1800s. The black codes were voted on first. The Jim Crow laws, it appears as though a little bit later. This was done after slavery. They needed a way to retaliate because slavery was big money for plantation owners in the South. Slaves were, by the way. And when Lincoln freed through the Emancipation Proclamation, they immediately retaliated, and they had control in politics at that time. This is why the period of Reconstruction did not, we weren't properly compensated. And black men were promised that defeated the South in the Civil War, because the South was Democrat, by the way. In case you don't know, the Confederate Army, and this is why a lot of military bases historically are located in the South. Like if you hear Fort so-and-so or whatever in Texas or whatever, North Carolina, South Carolina or whatever, it's because that was the Democratic Party, by the way. That wasn't originally Republicans. And we're not talking about a long, long time ago in history, because Democrats of today who try to place a lot of this blame, and you have to ask the question, by the way, and I'm not caping for the Republican Party, by the way, as some will say. I'm being fair. I'm personally not a registered voter, so I can cover this from an unbiased perspective. I don't receive money from the Democratic or Republican Party. And there's a lot of white people who are Republicans that don't even know, Caucasian people that don't even know of the history. But you have to ask the question, the Republicans are not trying to, in one instance, they're not trying to pass legislation to force you to do certain things that are not acceptable to your moral beliefs. A lot of those things in cancel culture comes from the Democratic Party. By the way, if you look at the Republicans, the values of conservatives that they stand for, a lot of blacks have conservative values by going to church and things of that sort, even though they vote Democratic. But it's the Democrats, and looking at their progressive policies, are designed in a way to keep us oppressed or in a state of oppression by not truly addressing the issues. And they know, because they still a significant portion of the black community votes Democrat. This is why they take advantage of a lot of minorities of black, aka black people, by the way, are tricked, and this is why they don't want a lot of black people, minorities, thinking and knowing this history that they oftentimes accuse the Republicans of. But the Democrats, once again, they were the ones specifically. This is a historical fact, and I wouldn't be wasting my time making a YouTube video to bring this up. But this is not brought up in a lot of documentaries. This is a massive cover up. This is not talked about, and this is what I wanted to address. The Democrats, once again, they were the ones that voted for and created the Jim Crow laws. Democrats attempted to re-enslave black people after slavery. by the way. It was the Republicans who were the abolitionists that fought to end slavery. Democrats also created the black codes, and the state of Mississippi, for example, created their own specific version of the black codes. You can look this up. Don't take my word for what I'm saying. The Democrats did this, not Republicans. And this did a lot of damage. The Jim Crow legislation went on for about 100 years. Let me pull up. There's an image that I had earlier that actually listed. I should have pulled it up already, so I wouldn't be taking these pauses. And I don't know how many people may have joined. I'm gonna take a look in the chat section really quick. I'll acknowledge you all because I know there's always people who join in the chat section. I'm going to acknowledge you guys in a little bit just to give you a heads up. But I wanted to go to this article, by the way, my YouTube video. And there's another reason why I would have more guests, by the way, in case you all are wondering, but because I'm covering this specific topic, I know there's a lot of people who are subscribed to my channel that don't like when I talk about this, but I have to, because February is Black History Month, and this is the least I can do for my people and explain why we've been conquered and what happened, what truly happened that a lot of documentaries don't talk about, by the way. Because down the road, in a couple months from now, when June gets here, the Alphabet Group they've been ramping up in more recent years. They'll be promoting their month specifically, but when it comes to things for Blacks and minorities, it's often frowned upon, and even unfortunately, even amongst many of our own as well. Okay, this is where. Okay, I'm looking for. Okay, here it is. I think I found it. There's a couple images. I just wanted to get the facts behind the Jim Crow laws that I was going over. Once again, this is what the Democratic Party voted on and created, by the way. I found out in the Minister Farrakhan's book, The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews, which was researched by his historical research department that gathered texts and data from, they mentioned, from their own writings. Was admitted by Jewish rabbis from their own synagogues and libraries, by the way. But they covered that up, and you can read between the lines. Okay, this doesn't have it. This picture I pulled up. There's another one that I have that has the specific time period, the timeline of the kind of the dates of how long the Jim Crow laws lasted. That's what I wanted to pull up. I may read. Okay, I think this one has it. Okay, here it is. It says, in case you're wondering, what are the Jim Crow laws? ? Because you may have heard about this in a lot of documentaries. There's a documentary that when I was a little boy, I used to watch growing up. It used to air on PBS, and I think Michigan is still channel 56, PBS, public broadcasting station. They would air this show. You can look up on YouTube. It was called Eyes on the Prize. And it was a good documentary, would cover, a lot of these things that took place during this time period. Without further ado, the Jim Crow laws were state and local laws in the United States between 1876 and 1965. Some even said, this is just on record, you can look up, that in some places, the remnants of that lasted after the late 60s into the early 70s, just like Texas was one of the last states to free the slaves, by the way. So it says that this, and this was voted on. I looked up the legislation. You'll have to go on Wikipedia, look up the Black Code separately and the Jim Crow laws. And this was done. They don't tell you this was the Democratic Party that was responsible behind this. And another thing I was covering, I forgot to mention, when Lincoln was part of that he belonged to a previous political party before they formed the Republican Party, and it was formed out of the need that the Democrats were terrorizing whites and blacks so much at the time. The Republican Party was formed out of necessity, and that's why Lincoln put in his writings, one of his first order of business was freeing the slaves, despite he felt he was forced to do it because he didn't really want to, but he wanted to preserve the Union at that time during the time period. He had a plan where they wanted to ship us back to Africa, allegedly, but he was forced to do so. And there was a reason why there was a deal that was made with black men who fought for the Union that defeated the South in the Civil War. They were promised 40 acres and a mule, which today that translates to, if you heard about in a lot of documentaries about reparations, the damage that was done was never properly addressed, by the way. This is part of the history that's not going into details. So they were created, the Jim Crow laws were created to keep blacks and whites separate. Some examples of the Jim Crow laws are the segregation of public schools, public places, public transportation, restrooms, restaurants, drinking, water fountains, and even the U.S. military were segregated. And you can pull up images online. Go on, type in on Yahoo, Bing search engine, Microsoft Bing, type in Jim Crow law images, look up Jim Crow laws on Wikipedia, document it, and black codes in case, because we know Google, they try to remove a lot of things, of course, to fit their narrative, fit their image, because they've even censored black channels. Even the brother that I did see the documentary, even though he failed to point out a lot of the importance, because there was an undertone I can see, like a bait and switch, which Dr. Boyce Watkins covers. He's talked about these bait and switches, and oftentimes there'll be people that they're connected to the Democratic Party, and this makes them look bad, or they don't want to cover the entire truth. So this is why I'm doing this video, to put it out there. So please spread the word, share this video if you can. By the way, it's up to you, but this is some of the real truth they don't talk about. They don't go over. That was the Democratic Party. That wasn't the Republicans who were responsible for this. So you see, this lasted for damn near 100 years. It says the Jim Crow laws were state and local laws in the United States between 1876 and 1965. Now, some of these images, articles will say up until the 1960s. And, you know, this is an example. They were created, once again, to keep blacks and whites separate. So I'm going to acknowledge you guys real quick in the chat section. I'm going to come back to the notes. Said Rashawn Elam in here says, hi, greetings to you, Rashawn. Timothy Michael says, what's up, Dorsey? Thank you for joining. Brian says, yo, Dorsey, hope all is well. Appreciate you. Yep, everything is good. Tim H says, great content. Dorsey, appreciate you. Thank you for that. Hadrupo Sosa Marquez says, peace, brother. Peace to you. Hadrupo, thank you for joining. Brian says, Hawaii is a democratic state. I wasn't aware of that. Thank you for that, for sharing that information. Now, I'm not saying it is things that that Democrats do that where they try to help, but I feel the onus is more on them to help black people to pass legislation for reparations, and I think monetary compensation should be sufficient based upon what took place. Remember, as I went over historically, the black soldiers that fought for the Union that defeated the South in the Civil War were promised by the general 40 acres and a mule, and they never received their land because after Lincoln was assassinated, I was informed by another historian who was more knowledgeable than myself that one of the president at the time had felt sorry for the white plantation owners that, you know, this is crazy, had previously owned slaves. You know, many of them were brutally tortured, you know, subjected to a horrendous lifestyle. Said he felt sorry for them and redistributed land that was supposed to go to us. So that's why, another reason why there is a big wealth gap. But there was other things that took place down the road, some of which I may get to in my notes. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find it specifically where they other problems where it was acknowledged years ago drugs were brought into black neighborhoods. There was even a movie, a mainstream movie that was done. It was brought out at certain movie theaters across the United States, only at select theaters. The actor from The Wire who passed away was one of the actors. It was based upon a reporter from the San Jose Mercury News years ago, Gary Webb. If you can look up old videos that still might be around on YouTube, he appeared on the Montel Williams show years ago. Different things. He was an investigative journalist. He worked for the San Jose Mercury News, and he had uncovered how the CIA, Central Intelligence Agency, had shipped drugs in the black neighborhoods to fund a war going on in South America or somewhere. I don't know all the details. I know the Black Panther leader in Detroit, uh, Mr. Shabazz, has covered this in the past. By the way, to get more into the specifics, you can find this information and research it. But this is a historical fact, and this was brought up and even acknowledged by some white people. By the way, in the city of Oakland, it's the reason why also the city of Oakland, when they acknowledged some of the wrongs that had been done, when they had given incentives to grow facilities. I watched a documentary about it. They had acknowledged some of these things that dealt with systemic racism, police brutality, and things of that sort. But this is significant. They made an actual movie that made it through Hollywood, but it only was allowed or featured at certain movie theaters across the United States. It was called Kill the Messenger, and it came out around 2014. It was based upon the investigative journalist that he was murdered, by the way, Gary Webb, by the way, and he was trying to warn. And this is where you get the real Freeway Rick Ross that a lot of the rappers use the name from, based upon the actual real Freeway Rick Ross, who's now out of prison, who has a book written and tells the story. He knows it better than I was. I was a bit before my time. I was young at the time. I didn't really know all the details, but I get the concept. I know of it. But these are part of the systemic problems that were done. They also brought guns in the neighborhood. This was done strategically, by the way, and this was also part of COINTELPRO, how they used these things to break up the Black Panther Party. Was J. Edgar Hoover, who was known bro. This was a known fact. J. Edgar Hoover did not John F. Kennedy. This is why they said some years back then they didn't want any more Kennedy brothers to run for president. This relative used to always tell me this. By the way, he also did not like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. For a while, he got along with Martin Luther King until Martin Luther King went against the establishment. But they had a what do you call it? Secret files. They were monitoring Martin Luther King like a docusery, similar to how former President Obama had surveilled Trump when he found out about that. And Hillary, by the way, was involved with that. By the way, there was a book that was written, a friend of mine gave me, by the way, that covers this. If you think I'm making this up, I can cam up real quick and I can show you guys. I don't remember the name of the book, but when I looked at a few pages, it freaked me out. But they actually kept records on these things. The FBI, they were surveilling Martin Luther King at the time and others, and the Black Panther Party, by the way. And this documentary that this brother had covered that I saw recently, this is why I said it was a good documentary. He pointed some things out, but he failed to point out the Democratic Party's involvement with the creation of the Jim Crow laws and the Black codes, and go into further detail about the period of Reconstruction and what happened. And the Democratic Party, the onus is more on the Democratic Party, has done far more damage from what I've gone over. If you research this, don't take my word for what I'm saying, versus what Republicans have done. Many Republicans and white people are not even aware of some of this history. I wasn't even until more recent years. I had a friend who shared this with me years ago, had a secret security clearance, by the way. I won't say his name, by the way. So I'm going to see if there's a way. I think there's a way for me to, I want to show you guys the name of the book. See if I'm still learning the StreamYard software, believe it or not. I'm looking for, okay, start cam. Okay, I see what to do. Hold on for a second. I'm going to show you guys the name of this book. I'm going to cam up a bit. This is the name of the book. A friend of mine gave me this. By the way, I haven't read this yet. I just skimmed through it. A lot of it freaked me. It spooked me out, by the way. But this was former FBI agent FBI. He was head of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, by the way. They made a movie about him too. But he had things about Dr. Martin Luther King and maybe others as well. Like it really freaked me out because my friend that gave this to me, by the way, he's an avid reader, I'll say, even more so than myself. And he shows like we want to show proof, evidence. So this kind of ties in with what I was going over. So I just wanted to cam up and show you this is the name of this specific book in case you guys thought I was making some of this stuff up. And there's other information online you can research too, by the way. So I just wanted to show you that the Democrats, and he was Lyndon Baines Johnson, by the way, when he took over after Kennedy was assassinated, he was a Democrat, by the way. And Kennedy was an outsider, similar to Trump. This elder pointed out, very similar to Trump, how Trump was not a traditional Republican. Trump was more a businessman. Kennedy was an outsider. He wasn't a traditional Democrat either. And that's why at the time, blacks, they switched over to the Democratic Party mostly because they felt he was looking out more so for their interest. And my relative who votes Democrat, she confirmed this with me. And she even gave me a little bit more information. She told me, because she was alive during this time, you know, I wasn't born until 79. And I've seen throughout the years how Black History Month has been dwindled down and shouldn't be relegated to just a month, by the way, in my opinion. When I saw that interview that the actor Morgan Freeman did, I do agree with him in that regard, but there does need to be some acknowledgement as far as what actually happened, what actually took place. And my relative told me the Black Panthers also felt some of them that didn't get along with Martin Luther King or didn't see eye to eye, similar to how you have different organizations today that bump heads with each other, like the Hebrew Israelites, the Nation of Islam, the Moorish, Science Simple, other groups that don't see eye to eye. She said the Black Panthers felt Martin Luther King wasn't moving fast enough. And the Black Panthers are portrayed as this militant organization, but they don't tell you, they worked with activists. They were a protectionary group for the Black community because Blacks were being terrorized by the police, the law enforcement at the time. During that time period, it was a lot different versus today. Now, some things haven't changed, by the way, but back then, you know, that was a tumultuous time period. And the Black Panthers had food programs, but just to show they were portrayed, but they were infiltrated by J. Edgar Hoover, that book that I just showed that started a program called COINTELPRO, which I didn't know about till some years ago. A friend of mine had shared with me. We were at a African bookstore at the time, and I told him, I said, "What is COINTELPRO?" And he said, "Hey, man, you never heard of COINTELPRO?" I said, "No." You know, being honest about it. So this is another friend separately who's a historian as well and has traveled overseas. I'll say I won't go into the details, but to show his credibility, he had a secret clearance in the military. I didn't learn that until years later. To show his research was credible, was impeccable, and we would be honest, we would be humble. When we disagreed on topics, we would cross-reference notes with each other, which historians should do. But a lot of times when people go over these documentaries and things, they have an agenda and they don't go over the full truth. And that's why I'm going over this information, how the Democrats are heavily involved in this massive cover-up. And a lot of people, a lot of Black nationalists who do these documentaries don't talk about this or cover this aspect. Some of them do acknowledge this. And that's why many Black people who are Republicans, a lot of them do know some of this history, by the way. Maybe not all of it, portions, and that's why they don't vote. Their reasons why they don't vote Democrat, and also reason why there's independents out there. Just like Chance the Rapper pointed out, Black people, you don't have to vote Democrats. There are other parties you can vote for. By the way, but it's important to learn the issues, and you should receive a return investment on the candidates that you put your interest into. By the way. Okay, NAACP was created by the Jews, but was not headed by Blacks until 20 to 30 years after the organization's inception, by the way. Just something to note. The National Association of Advancement for Colored People, that's what the NAACP, National Color Advancement Program, something like that, an acronym, was originally created by Jews, but was not headed by Blacks until 20 to 30 years after. So they created your organizations. That's the Democratic Party, by the way. That's the leftists. They were the ones that were lynching black people after slavery. They didn't want, us having economic power. The period of Reconstruction, that was after the slaves were free, after we defeated the South in the Civil War. Black men, they were promised by the Union general, and then a president, I don't know which one, vetoed the legislation and redistributed land to white plantation owners who had already terrorized black people and things. So that's another reason why there's a major wealth gap, a wealth disparity, and that's oftentimes not addressed. Not the specifics are not gone into in the documentary. And let me see. Okay, there's another part I would like to cover. So just bear with me. Okay. And there's a reason I won't go into details right now, but the National Basketball Association, the NBA, has a connection to why there's a reason why they lean a certain way politically. I have some notes. I won't go into that. I feel for this video, it's neither here nor there, but there is a relation. The globalists, aka ruling class elite, they study the demographics of different cultures too, and they know how to stir up division. So remember also the mainstream media is used as a tool to not only help promote propaganda, they also forcefully push these narratives. This is the mainstream media does this by the use of shaming tactics. Their opposing political side collectively, oftentimes they accuse behavior of people who promote things like this of conspiracy theory extremism, like their opposition. They always try to paint the Republicans as this. And as I pointed out earlier, with hardcore solidified, irrefutable evidence, unequivocally, the Democratic Party created the Jim Crow laws and the Black codes specifically. You can look this up. Don't take my word for what I'm saying, but they cover this up. This is the main reason why I'm doing this video. I'm tired of it. This is just ridiculous. And they always are blaming the Republican Party, and they're not acknowledging the damage that they have caused. The onus is more so on the Democratic Party to fix this versus the Republicans. But there's a lot of white people who are Republicans, conservatives, who do not know this or not aware of this history. A lot of this it's covered up, but that's why one of the reasons. But I do acknowledge at the same time, I didn't say some of these things when I talked about the drugs being brought into communities, the Black community specifically. I'm not saying that out of victimhood, but there was a strategic plan to put in place to destabilize the Black communities, to keep them from having economic wealth, economic empowerment, and financial prosperity. By the way, and once again, Joe Biden supported the 1994 crime bill, as well as, remember, Hillary and her husband, Bill, by the way. And, there was video footage, if YouTube hasn't removed it, where Biden was going hard. So he was responsible for a lot of Black men. If you have any Black relatives that were from that time period were locked up in prison, Joe Biden, keep in mind, a lot of that damage cannot be repaired. Once people go to prison, a lot of times they get killed in there. They don't make it out. They get higher, longer sentences. So Joe Biden, he played an instrumental role in that. And that oftentimes, and they kept trying to, shine away from this. This is why another thing Democrats did, the elder pointed out to me, they went into damage control mode. There was a known racist years ago. I have to look up what his position was. George Wallace. He was actually shot, but they changed up. They started acknowledging it was bad public relations for them at the time. So this is why they also started doing things to appeal to minorities, aka Black people, to try to win over the Black vote and things. So keep that in mind, that they do the same thing that they were accusing Trump of, taking photo ops or trying to get rappers to campaign for them for their political parties and stuff. But this all started years ago because, I went over the reason why a lot of Black people switched over to the Democratic Party. They felt the Kennedy brothers, specifically John and Robert, they were looking out for them more so than the Republicans were. And Martin Luther King was working. Of course, he helped, get that legislation for that Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed, so that they looked at this, that they felt the Democrats had their back more so. That's why a majority of a significant portion of the Democratic Party of Black people switched over to voting Democrat. The problem was that, as we see all these years later, they weren't dissecting the political issues. And I did understand different people's areas where they live at geographically may be different, but this is one of the reasons the Democrats, they were responsible, and the Jim Crow laws, the legislation that was passed was created by the Democratic Party, and the black codes that were separate. You can look up once again. I know you guys hear me repeating myself, but this is oftentimes, it's a massive cover up. They do not want to address that. Think about how many documentaries are breaking down what I've just shared, have talked about that, have admitted that. Okay. Another thing you kind of have going on was, I was behind Ice Cube, not because I'm a fan or whatnot. It's because he's a businessman. When he was at the time, when he met with Trump, when he was trying to do things in the best interest of the Black community at the time, with Ice Cube, he was called a coon, by the way. So what Black people will do was call you a coon, and there were others who were backing Ice Cube that were behind the scenes with the contract with Black America. Charlemagne the God from the Breakfast Club talked about. And remember, the Democratic Party at the time, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, said, we'll holler at us after the election, by the way. And then Trump told Ice Cube and others specifically he would increase the amount for that proposal. I forget what it was called specifically. It was meant to try to help repair the damage, because he already had something dealing with the opportunity zones that Dr. Ben Carson and others, and the former billionaire, one of the first African-American billionaires, Robert Johnson, who had been at the White House, who had met with Trump several times, who also supports reparations, by the way, in case you all are not aware. The original founder of Black Entertainment Television, Robert Johnson, Bob Johnson, some may call, by the way, was at the White House in different times, and they were working with Trump. Similarly, how Martin Luther King, who was a registered Republican, was working with John F. Kennedy, who was a Democrat, by the way, because they felt at the time Kennedy was an outsider, similar to Trump being an outsider. He wasn't Trump wasn't a traditional Republican. Kennedy wasn't a traditional Democrat. This is something that the elder pointed out too. But once again, when both sides, you have those who were trying to do things on behalf of the Black community. There's a boule class of the Black community who were giving Ice Cube and others a hard time when they try to do things to help Black people, but they weren't addressing this themselves. You have that going on, that problem as well. Okay, let me go over this this other aspect. Another thing Joe Biden did, he called a former KKK member, Robert Byrd, a friend, mentor, and guide at his funeral. Joe Biden was also really good friends with Strom Thurmond, a known racist. So keep this in mind. Joe Biden was friends with James Eastland, who was a former plantation owner. Joe Biden called former KKK member Robert Byrd a friend, mentor, and guide at his funeral. By the way, former Senator Robert Byrd. Joe Biden was also really good friends with Strom Thurmond, a known racist, by the way. Just keep that in mind. This is not talked about amongst members of the Democratic Party, by the way, but they were telling you, we need to get Trump out of office. You need to get your boy Biden in. Just putting it out there. Nothing benefits the African-American family in terms of reparations right now. The entitlement programs, a lot of times that was created through the welfare state, goes to the Black female, Black women, because she's considered a double minority. So years ago, Dr. Claude Anderson, who I was informed by the elder, helped pass legislation to create that originally created affirmative action, which was meant to help repair the damage mostly went to black women and white women. If you don't know white women, I found out a friend of mine went to a presentation he shared with me years ago at a college where white women had admitted affirmative action got her a 4-year scholarship. Where some black people had student loans, had to pay for college, she benefited off of affirmative action because she was considered a minority. So the elder also had pointed out and shared with me what happened, because these things were meant to try to help repair, address the damage, which that's why he said we shouldn't have gotten the entitlement programs in the 60s with Lyndon Baines Johnson when Martin Luther King was at the White House. That only put a band-aid on things. That didn't address the actual issue. That didn't repair the damage, as the elder pointed out to me. That just put a band-aid on these things. And further, because they had a plan when they to fund the feminist movement and also the gay movement, which they stole that logo, the image from Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push Coalition. By the way, that was pointed out. These other groups, when it was predominantly black men, African American men who were on the front lines at the time. So there was a combination of things that happened. Martin Luther King also spoke about black men were disproportionately being drafted in the Vietnam War. There was footage on this. That's when Lyndon Baines Johnson started calling him the N-word preacher right after Martin Luther King had won the Nobel Peace Prize, by the way. She felt this wasn't fair because we made up a smaller percentage of the population. And as I previously pointed out, you guys can clearly see they had just that legislation also ended the Jim Crow laws, but some people said there were still remnants of the after effects that still went on, which the Democratic Party voted for and created the Jim Crow laws and black codes. But the Civil Rights Act, you can look it up, of 1964 was supposed to address and end and punish states to not get funded if they did not pass laws to go along with that, by the way. But when Martin Luther King spoke against the Vietnam War, this is on record. There was video footage of this. You guys have to track the footage down, but I saw it already. It was on YouTube some years ago because, there's been a massive cover up. They want to try to control the narrative, by the way. That's why a lot of liberals say Martin Luther King was alive today. They say he would be a liberal. We honestly don't know which side. And I asked the question, which version of Martin Luther King would you get? Because they don't tell you. He was registered as a Republican, and Martin Luther King applied for a gun purchase permit, by the way. He was working with Kennedy. Kennedy was considered an outsider of the Democratic Party, similar to Trump. Trump was not a traditional Republican. Kennedy was not a traditional Democrat. And Kennedy had won his election for presidency by a narrow margin, by the way, at that time, during that time period. And my friend, another friend of mine who was a historian, very accurate. This is highly accurate information behind the scenes that's not covered in a lot of documentaries. The mafia was who also worked, unfortunately, sadly, with the United States government and Kennedy's assassination. He pointed out, helped get Kennedy in office by winning the state of Illinois, by the way. The mob, yes. If you know anything about, they played a role in that and helping get Kennedy in office. Yep. So there's a lot of things that people don't understand that's not pointed out. So another thing, we black men didn't abandon our women, our black women. It was the economics controlled by the powers that be. When they created these things, when they created the feminist movement, they wanted to, basically, they broke apart. Their strategy was to break apart the black men and black women who were marching together during the civil rights movement. See, they no longer needed us. They created the independent women by funding the feminist movement. They used Gloria Steinem, who admitted this was declassified. She was sent out as an agent by J. Edgar Hoover. And I kept asking myself, who was that woman who was sitting right next to Hillary Rodham Clinton the night that she lost to Donald J. Trump during the election going into the wee hours of the morning? I recognize that woman because if Hillary had won, that's who the elites, the ruling class, had wanted, but they didn't have everything set up. They weren't able to cheat as much as they did, as we know down the road. So that's why Trump ended up winning, because he had such a large margin. But who was sitting next to Hillary that night was Gloria Steinem. I said, where have I seen this white woman before? Because I have a partial photographic memory. And I said, she looks familiar. And it didn't dawn on me, because if Hillary had won, they had already had articles created ahead of time, magazines that Hillary, they expected was going to be the first woman president, because, you know, they want to be able to write the narrative, write the story. They control Hollywood. That's why Hollywood is mostly progressive. So it's not a coincidence why Hollywood is mostly Democrat. It's mostly liberal, socialist, progressive. You see, they want to control the narrative, but they also use the Central Intelligence Agency, the FBI. So they used Gloria Steinem to infiltrate the Black community. She recruited a Black woman by the name of Michelle Wallace. There may not be as much information. You can look this up, but I found out, I researched this years ago. Michelle Wallace was used as a patsy to get feminist Black women to join the feminist movement. That's why today you have the modern day divestors on YouTube. They always get on the Black manosphere, but a lot of what they accuse the Black manosphere of, they are guilty of themselves. Like the passport bros, you have Black women who are going down to Jamaica recruiting and getting with underage Black boys and things. So oftentimes what they accuse, they do the same thing of, because they want power. They want the sole power, but this was done. The powers that be wanted to create division in the Black community. They can control you better, and especially when they can divide the male and female apart. That's their purpose, and they had it planned ahead of time. Funded. Feminist movement was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Ford Foundation. By the way, on record, this was admitted when former movie producer, rest in peace to Aaron Russo, who had produced the movie Changing Lanes, mainstream movie with Eddie Murphy some years ago, some other movies, had befriended Nick Rockefeller. His lawyer had reached out some years ago, if you know the story, and had stated to Nick Rockefeller, had stated to Aaron Russo that, you know, who funded that the welfare movement and things and feminist movement. He admitted that to Aaron Russo. And that's how we know Aaron Russo asked him what was the ultimate goal at the time. And Nick Rockefeller admitted to him privately. He says, we want to see everybody chipped one day, microchip. And Aaron asked him why. He said, why are you doing this to people and stuff? Because Aaron was a real human. Aaron had compassion. Aaron was authentic. Didn't understand at the time. He was recruited because Nick Rockefeller at the time had got word of a documentary he had done called Mad as Hell before he produced the documentary called Freedom to Fascism or whatever. And, you know, it's one of the ways they will recruit you. Like another thing someone had mentioned, they don't necessarily want martyrs anymore, even though they can still kill you. They want to be able to assassinate your character. So they can do this by controlling the media and also by censoring you, shadow banning you, deplatforming you. They don't have to, they don't want martyrs anymore. It was stated. They can, because when they can deplatform you, they can create a whole nother you, make up lies about you, by the way. And I saw this happen, by the way, with from Alex Jones mentioned this. He has a podcast he started now that's separate from InfoWars, because, you know, he's going through the lawsuit, and they've done this to other people. They no longer, he says, necessarily want martyrs, and because martyrs inspire people, by the way, because they know if they kill one person, these people have a whole movement of people that are inspired by them. They don't want that. So one of the things they want to do is they attempt to discredit the information. If you look at the movie Enemy of the State, the actor Gene Hackman, when he told Will Smith, a character in the movie, they assassinate your character first, then they may move on to physically kill you. But nowadays, because of technology, they also don't need to have martyrs. They don't necessarily want martyrs anymore, but they have the technology. They want to use their apparatus, their mainstream media apparatus, to assassinate your character. Now they can just do this but the push of a button. It was a whistleblower from Google, Zach Voorhees, some years ago, explained how they were creating new algorithms and things secretly. And, you know, the Twitter files that Elon Musk was releasing that has brought out damning information with collusion from Katie Hobbs, who was running against Kerry Lake in Arizona, how Democrats had colluded with Twitter and others with the deep state and censoring their opponents, conservatives, in a very egregious fashion. And some of these things are campaign violations and break other laws and things of that sort. But this is because of technology, this is the apparatus they have at their disposal. So the top 1% controls the economy through owning major corporations. You have to look at the master puppeteer at the 1% that controls the 95%, the rest of the 95% of the population. Many of our famous men who are athletes and entertainers are controlled and told specifically they cannot help their own community. You see, they'll cancel you. They'll do you what they did to Kanye, for example. That's why I don't believe LeBron James can really help you. They just told a lie. Remember, they got on LeBron when he said what he said about what was happening overseas in China, and that caused a whole big ruckus. Remember, with the students protesting in Taiwan. He's only allowed to go so far. They are told if you help your community, and also how they punish Kyrie Irving. He's another example. Look at what they were doing to our brother Kyrie. I'm glad he went to the Dallas Mavericks. At least down there, it's not as what's happening in that liberal city state that he was in previously. So I think that was a better move for Kyrie to make. And Mark Cuban, by the way, he's a good guy overall down there. I think he would do better than the other owner, who they don't tell you some things about. I won't go into details. They are told if you help your community, then you won't have a career no more. Remember, they also do this with preachers years ago. If you know about the FBI, also is an acronym for faith-based initiative. During the Bush administration, if you don't know, Bishop T.D. Jakes had to meet with President Bush. This was put on Entertainment Tonight. I remember years ago, they had a headline because I was staying with the pastor at the time. After me and my family had been involved in a house fire, I was the last person to make it out the house. Big shout out to Pastor Parnell at the time. And there was a story that was ran by Entertainment Tonight where they were talking about Bishop T.D. Jakes, who was very tough at the time and compromising. It looks like he's given in to a degree. I know they understand they put so much pressure on you, by the way, but they had something years ago where secretly Homeland Security had met with pastors. They wanted to use the pastors to calm people down in a plan. If they were going to implement concentration camps or detainment camps, they would use preachers to calm people down. Also, something that's not talked about, I've been on the African Diaspora channel to comment, which does an excellent job. Philip Scott and the commentators and contributors to the channel, real big shout out to them and their fight for reparations, which I do support, as well as Tariq Nasheed. I pointed out that Reverend Al Sharpton also worked with the FBI. It was known, and this was reported on years ago by independent media. Not only did InfoWars report on this, some other main independent media outlets were aware. But recent information has come out. A friend of mine who was a black conservative, shared this with me. I didn't know this, but there was a whistleblower, cab driver, I don't know his name, and said Al Sharpton was in the vehicle at the time. He was wearing a wiretap. He wore the wiretap to take down Assata Shakur. So keep that in mind. Al Sharpton worked with the FBI to take down mob bosses, but he also worked with the FBI to take down black business owner who was prominent in Detroit years ago. You can look up LeVan Hawkins. He passed away. He owned Little Caesars franchises, some Pizza Hut franchises, some Burger King franchises, and other business ventures he had. I found out Al Sharpton wore the wiretap to take down prominent black business owner LeVan Hawkins. This was shared with me, by the way. So I don't know all the details, but that was shared from a friend. But just it is a known fact that Al Sharpton did work with the FBI. That was in a book a friend of mine also gave me, because the documentary, if you know about COINTELPRO. So many of your activists, he might be trying to correct things he feels in his own way by doing his other work that he does with Benjamin Crump. But just something to keep in mind, he wore the wiretap in his bid to attempt to take down Assata Shakur, if you know who she is, by the way. So just something, there's a lot of deep stuff that's not talked about. So once again, this boils down, there's a top 1% who controls these endorsements. They put pressure on people and they threaten people by ending their career. Our sister Lauryn Hill is another one of them. If you've seen Entertainers, she won multiple Grammys years ago before Beyonce. And you see these entertainers go broke. She went against the establishment to a degree. You know, they'll oftentimes come up with things that you don't pay taxes. Look what they did to Wesley Snipes. They'll say all this other BS, come up with stuff. You notice right after they did what they did to Kanye, they said he owed the IRS $60 million or whatever, something like that. So see how you see the pattern, what I'm going over? Because they mismanaged, they'll say they mismanaged their finances or whatever. But So when you go against the powers that be, they come against you financially. So we see they're using the financial system, which they already use as a weapon. Debt is their weapon. Financial slavery, they already use that. But that's just why it's difficult for entertainers and those. That's why I commend Kanye, Kyrie, and others in their own respective beliefs and regards that have stood against the establishment, as well as what's her name, Jaguar Wright as well, who exposed a lot. And there's been numerous others I can't think of offhand. What's his name? Isaiah Washington from Grey's Anatomy, who now follows me on Twitter. I commend him for standing up against the agenda he went through years ago, you know, with that the gay thing when they were trying to accuse him of that over some bull, and he's a minority on top of that, considered a minority. But keep in mind, it's this top 1% that controls these entities and they use these as vices to divide people up through gender war and by race war as well. They also have that part of their apparatus. Democrats, once again, they don't point this out. Democrats were the ones pushing for the censorship, cancel culture. Democrats supported violence from Antifa, BLM. Democrats want to end the nuclear family. This is a fact. There was a woman when Brandon Tatum was in a debate on Fox Soul. One of the hosts from Fox Soul tried to tell Brandon Tatum that BLM did not remove this from their website. And Brandon Tatum, and I saw this, she just lied. She may not have been aware, but Brandon Tatum tried to explain to her. And this is a historical fact. They removed this from their website. Now, I don't know if they brought it back, but they specifically stated at one time they did not support the nuclear family structure. And there were some people, Black YouTubers, who did videos exposing this at the time. Some were censored, by the way. But this is another reason. This is why I specifically don't support. I support the moniker, but not the organization. There's a difference. The organization's been corrupted. They don't support the nuclear family structure. And one of the main ways Dr. Benjamin Carson talked about, who Dr. Benjamin Carson received an award for separating two Siamese twins years ago, which is a phenomenal thing. For a Black man to become a doctor is rare within itself, but even received an award for separating two Siamese twins. He's even quoted on record, one of the most important things you need to do to fix the Black culture is the Black family. And I agree with him. And it's funny how a lot of Black women who were liberals and Blacks used to support him until they found out he was a Republican, and sadly doesn't support him anymore. But it's not the Republicans who are the ones pushing for this censorship and cancel culture more so. That's predominantly coming from the Democratic Party specifically. And it's egregious laws that they're pushing behind. There's those repercussions, like financially destroy one person. That's not the Republican. That's the Democrat progressives doing that. Everybody's environment or situation is different. For example, from my experience in Detroit, I don't worry about the KKK in my immediate vicinity, but I have to watch other niggas, aka Black people, especially if I attend any BLM and Antifa protests. Some say it's the people, your own neighbors, sadly, you have to watch because they've been indoctrinated through the Democratic Party, by the way. Now, understand you do have forms of racism in different states, different places, demographically. It's important to understand that, but a lot of the Democratic Party doesn't tell you about the white liberals' power structure within their party. A lot of white people, the demographics of white people that still Caucasian people that vote Democrat, that are remnants of the Democratic Party that created the Jim Crow laws, the legislation, voted for the legislation. And this is a historical fact once again, and voted for the Black codes. So they changed some of the things around, but it's important to know the real history, by the way. So these are some of the other aspects was going over. I'm not going to a few things I wanted to point out that doesn't get talked about or doesn't get addressed in a lot of these documentaries. One of the things I'm going to go over before I shut the video down, I went over it. I'm going to cam up again. Oh, and here's a famous quote I just came across from my notes. This is a quote by Malcolm X. Rest in peace to Malik El Haj Shabazz. Says the worst enemy of a black man is a white liberal. He quoted this. This is on record. I was surprised when I found this out. But Malcolm X, believe it or not, because a lot of blacks who call themselves being pro-black or having Malcolm X images behind their logo, or when they do videos, don't talk about this. You have to point out the overall aspect of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, what they believed in, what they knew. Martin Luther King supported reparations, by the way. Once again, this doesn't get talked about. A lot of white liberals, and I know white Caucasian people, whether Republican or Democrats, like to use Martin Luther King, but they don't know he supported reparations. This is a historical fact. There's video footage about this where he addressed this. He created something called the Poor People's Project. And Malcolm X quoted, so this doesn't get talked about, it's still covered up, about the white liberals amongst the Democratic Party. Democrats are always trying to point the finger and blame and talk about Republicans. When they talk about this big switch that took place. Okay, let me go over, you have to go back to the basics. Okay, I won't go, that gets in the mill-in. I won't talk about that. Some of the voting stuff. Republicans, there's a demographic that does support traditional free speech, free thinking. I don't see hardly any mainstream Democratic activists at all that support freedom of speech in the First Amendment or free thinking. That's fighting for that. The censorship is mostly coming from the Democratic Party, predominantly. I have seen some conservatives, Republicans talk about it, but this is primarily mostly coming from the Democratic Party on a massive level. We've talked about people that have lost their channels, YouTube channels. They've lost their AdSense revenue. They've been deplatformed. They've been shadow banned because Google, who owns YouTube or controls YouTube, Alphabet, their parent company, they're liberal, which they originally registered as public utilities, meaning they were not supposed to discriminate against, just like the rule years ago when people got lights, water, gas, public utilities, water, lights, gas bill, electric bill, these Facebooks, the Twitters, YouTubes, they originally registered as public utilities. So they are violating freedom of speech. People are trying to say because they're private platforms, but the thing is they registered as public utilities though, so they're still breaking the law. They should have said up front that they are biased, that they're a liberal platform. They should have admitted that up front. But why did they have to hire engineers to secretly change the algorithms around to censor people? You see, just something to think about. You see, when I break it down that way, you're able to understand it better. I'm just giving my opinion about these topics for educational purposes, but a lot of what I'm saying, you can read between the lines, is highly accurate. What I went over earlier, definitely about the Democrats creating the Jim Crow laws and the black codes. I encourage you all to look that up to see, to prove what I'm going over is a fact. And that's still online the last time I checked. Okay, I'm looking for some other important part. Okay. I'm going to go over, there's an article I have that highlights, there's a book called The Secret Relationship Between Blacks and Jews. And I believe this is from part 1. I shouldn't say I believe, I know this is from part 1. I'm going to cam up in a little bit and I'm going to show you all the physical copy that I have. By the way, now here's some excerpts. When slavery was outlawed in the colony of Georgia, Jews left. They returned once slavery was reinstated. In Newport, Rhode Island, the center of the rum and slave trade, every Jewish family owned slaves. Even their synagogue was built by black slaves. Some of skill. It says all 22 Newport distilleries serving the triangular slave trade were owned by Jews. This is an expert of someone did a sum up. This is from the Nation of Islam's Historical Research Department. They got this from their own writings from Jewish synagogues and rabbis. They admitted this. Okay, part 2, the secret relationship between blacks and Jews. I just went over a little bit of volume 1. There was a part 2, and I have part 1 and 2. There's like maybe a 3 and 4, but I don't have part 3 or 4. But I have volume 1 and 2. Yeah, blacks were promised, I went over this earlier, they were promised 40 acres and a mule, and they didn't receive it. So I guess this book, I haven't read these books cover to cover, but I'm reading an excerpt of an article I found online. There's 29 pages. It's a PDF file. Has very powerful, potent information that has references, just like you do a research paper, you cite your sources, where your sources come from. And this is one of the reasons a friend of mine told me years ago, separately, there was something that Farrakhan did, and this is one of the reasons why he's been blacklisted, or some say whitelisted, to this day from speaking before Congress. They didn't want him to put these books out, by the way. With, he's a representative of the NOI, the Nation of Islam. Okay, there's one part I'm looking for specifically. Okay, here it is, right here. It says there's an area that talks about at least one Masonic temple was known to have a slave auction room. It says Jews were major forces in the racist Freemasonry movement, whose members were also active participants in the Ku Klux Klan. When the General Nathan Bedford Forrest, the Klan's original Grand Wizard, assembled the Klan for a meeting in 1867 at the Masonic Hall, they first donned their Masonic regalia. An hour later, their Ku Klux Klan regalia. The founder of Reform Judaism, Rabbi Isaac Mayer Wise, says in 1855 was unequivocal about the Jewish role in Freemasonry. Masonry is a Jewish institution whose history, degrees, charges, passwords, and explanations are Jewish from the beginning to end. During the 1920s Klan resurgence, the Masons were particularly rich hunting grounds for Klan recruiters. So significant was Freemasonry to the Jews that at the turn of the century, a Masonic lodge was of higher priority than a synagogue. It says at least one Masonic temple was known to have a slave auction room. Jews supported and helped set up Jim Crow. Prominent Jews fought to establish, maintain, and strengthen the slave codes and the Jim Crow laws. Slave codes may be when I told you guys to look up the black codes, or like another name for the slave codes. Look, there was legislation. They were both voted on separately in the late 1800s, and that was done by the Democratic Party, by the way. There were over 100 Jewish mayors and literally hundreds of Jewish public officials in the slavery and Jim Crow South. They held the offices of congressman, senator, and state legislature. As elected officials, they upheld and reinforced white supremacy and racial discrimination. That's why it's not a coincidence today that they control a majority of Hollywood. When Kanye West talked about the name of the guy specifically that requested, what's his name, R.E. Emanuel, that requested for him to be censored. The commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, of Jewish descent. Many of these owners of these record labels, distribution companies, are Jewish. I looked up many from Jerry Heller, Ice Cube talked about. Who else is important? You look at movie producers, even from Harvey Weinstein. It's not a coincidence. Who else? And you can look up the Wikipedias on these people. It's not a coincidence, but they played a role in the Jim Crow laws, and that's why it's not a coincidence to this day. And if you speak against them like they did to Kanye, that's an example. They go after you politically and financially. And I'll read, Brian says in the comment section, our people were promised an education on America. They made the Hawaiian slaves. Yeah, they did a similar thing to indigenous people a lot of places. They were promised education as well. Yes, you're right about that. So before I shut this video down, I'm going to go over some more things that isn't pointed out in mainstream documentaries that's oftentimes covered up, by the way. Okay, here we go. Once again, not only was Joe Biden heavily lobbied for the 1994 crime bill, one in particular, black women said it's a strategy. Some of us black men, you shouldn't forget that when Kamala Harris was a prosecutor, she was responsible for locking up a lot of black men as well. So if you're African American, black man or woman that had a relative that was done unfairly and that received a lot of time, this was pointed out by some activists out there, and they received a lot of time when Kamala Harris was a prosecutor, by the way. And Joe Biden lobbied heavily for the 1994 crime bill. So what has changed all of a sudden where blacks who support the Democrats and black women who are encouraging black men to stay on the Democratic slave plantation? When they did this, these are things that they oftentimes try to cover up, frown away from. When you're exposing this is treated as a crime because when you're ruled by criminals. They don't want, of course, a lot of minorities, black people knowing some of these truths overall. Remember when Wolf Blitzer from CNN got on Nancy Pelosi for halting that $1,200 stimulus check? That was like their own infighting. So remember, once again, Wolf Blitzer from CNN even scolded Nancy Pelosi for that. And I saw a lot of black people, even on social media, were going off about that. Could have had an additional stimulus check if it wasn't for Nancy Pelosi at the time. Don't forget about that. She was a Democrat. Once again, the Democrats, through cancel culture, they fired people from their job, even if they support Trump. The Republicans, they're not structured like that. Democrats want to end the family structure. They want to ban guns. They want to end freedom of speech. Let me say this again. Black Lives Matter, they put that on their website. They don't support the nuclear family structure. I do. That's why my Parler account, which is more conservative, my Instagram account is my more liberal side. But I'm grounded, but I support the nuclear family structure. But Democrats, they want to end the nuclear family structure. They want to ban the guns and they want to end freedom of speech. It's oftentimes disguised in other ways. So they're the ones when they push this cancel culture, they get people fired from their jobs and stuff. Not Republicans doing that. Those are Democrats doing that. They were even doxing people. That actually happened with me. Someone at the time when I was doing YouTube videos some years ago in my work uniform, I had a coworker that snitched on me, and they told me when I had to meet with my bosses at the time, that someone snitched on me. And then I knew, it didn't dawn on me at first. And then I said, oh, I know who it is now. Because I knew I had only told that one person what I was attempting to do at the time. So yeah, and they will turn against their own. Some of the other things I'm not going into details about, but I'm going to get ready. I'm going to go over a little bit more notes, but I'm looking for some things that are related more so to the topic that's not covered or talked about in a lot of documentaries. The main thing I wanted to get out the way, I wanted to cover before you guys, was how, and I know I keep repeating this and emphasizing this, but this doesn't get talked about. You might be hearing this for the first time, but the Democratic Party, they were the ones who created the Jim Crow laws where we couldn't use certain restrooms, certain bathrooms, where the schools were segregated. That was the Democratic Party. And that wasn't a long time ago in history. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was supposed to end that. But there were people in other states that mentioned, you know how it takes a while for certain laws to go into effect. And one of the things the elder did explain to me, that one of the parts that we messed up at as blacks at the time that did have our own businesses. When we started patronizing white businesses, we abandoned our own black businesses. Oftentimes that doesn't get pointed out as well. And then white establishments or Caucasian business owners that started allowing blacks to, they had to come through the back in certain instances when they started opening up. They started seeing that this was additional commerce for themselves. So when you have today what you've heard of culture vultures, that's historically that ties in with the what that kind of derives from, is that other establishments started seeing by having more minorities patronize their businesses. Where we messed up at, the elder pointed out to me, is when we abandoned our black businesses. We had black owned cab companies, we had even black hospitals, black doctors, we had movie theaters, we had black owned car washes. Those were some of the businesses, barbershops, beauty salons. And I'm not covering the aspect where they also built major freeways through that damaged some of the infrastructure for black businesses too. There were things that were done, and I didn't cover too much about. They did bring drugs into black neighborhoods. I pointed to, there was a factual movie that was based upon the accuracy of this called "Kill the Messenger." It was based off the reporter Gary Webb, who years ago he met with the real original Freeway Rick Ross, who a lot of rappers base their rap name off of. But the real Freeway Rick Ross, you can get his book. He's done interviews already. But that movie they did called "Kill the Messenger" documents how they brought drugs in the black community. There's even older footage of Maxine Waters years ago. She was known and became prominent at the time when she was fighting earlier on in her career, in her political career. She pointed that out during some congressional session, by the way, dealing with that when that information had gotten declassified, leaked out, that the members of the CIA, they were funding some type of drug war in another country, and they did things that damaged, specifically targeted the Black American. That's why another reason why you're supposed to give compensation when someone is damaged. It's like why someone, if they're at fault in a car accident, they're supposed to pay damages. That's why you have insurance companies supposed to pay restitution to the party involved. A lot of white conservatives like Candace Owens and others who are against reparations don't talk about that or don't point that out, the damage that's been done when somebody has been harmed. And there's many instances, and other historians can point out more aspects than even myself, where Black Americans have been harmed, historically damaged, and restitution and reciprocity has not been brought forth, properly addressed. Many don't know that history. Okay, let me see. Go down to this part. I'm gonna working on wrapping things up. Trying to remember, I need to get to this other aspect. Oh, I can use this. We're getting done. I know I've been going on for quite a while, so don't mean to bore you guys, but I got some more information to cover. Okay, I think I'm in the area where, okay, I kind of went over this earlier, but they broke our families apart through aid to dependent children. They drafted Black men into the Vietnam War. I just covered, they put drugs in our community. They exploited us through Black exploitation films. They pacified us with government jobs, etc. So there was a combination of things that happened. There wasn't one particular thing when they destabilized the Black community and they caused major damage. This goes back to slavery and Jim Crow and other things, systemic racism, once again. So the Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, they funded the feminist movement. It's admitted, Gloria Steinem admitted on record, she was an agent sent by J. Edgar Hoover. She recruited a Black woman by the name of Michelle Wallace to create the feminist movement to break the Black woman apart from Black men. Remember, a Black woman could not receive assistance if she had a Black male living in a household at the time, to her caseworker that she had to report to. At the time, even the caseworker would call the house. If she found out a male was living at the house at the time, the woman would get cut off assistance. So that's how they blackmail women into that. And then they also started pushing the child support agenda as Black women started gaining power when they started being considered a double minority to destabilize the black man from being the head of the household. As black fathers started to decline from being in their children's lives at the time, was over up until the late 60s, 80% over 80% of black households had a father in the home, but it started to break apart. See, there was an agenda. This was done strategically, and yes, the U.S. government was involved. Central Intelligence Agency. That's why they made the movie. Once again, look up the history of it. It's not just kill the messenger, but look up who Gary Webb was. Look up the history. See, they're trying to cover a lot of this information, this education up. This is part of Black history that's not talked about. A lot of boule people, bourgeois people, some are called, don't talk about this. But they broke apart our families through aid to dependent children. That was the welfare state. That was the entitlement programs I went over when Lyndon Baines Johnson, when Martin Luther King worked with him to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They drafted black men into the Vietnam War, which Martin Luther King spoke against before he was murdered, by the way, because we made up a smaller percentage of the population, but were being drafted into the Vietnam War disproportionately. And then you look at Joe Biden when he's done with this war with Ukraine, and those that try to argue that the Democrats are doing more for the black community than what Trump did, but they don't point out how Biden gave billions of dollars to Ukrainian people and just poo-poo. And then remember, he also allocated millions of dollars for the crack pipes. Remember, that was a separate story. I think ABL covered that. You know, just pointing it out there. You know, once again, but you saw all these Negroes put up a Ukrainian flag on their Facebook profiles and Instagrams, etc. You know, but they swore up and down, we need to get Trump out of office. You need to get your boy Biden in. Get your boy Biden. Yep. And this is the same Biden that voted for the 1994 crime bill and all the other atrocities I went over previously. He was deeply involved in this, the racist Democratic Party. You see, you look this up, you'll see the Democrats' deeply racist roots. So the onus is more on them to repair the damage than the Republican Party. But oftentimes they push the argument away because many blacks are brainwashed. My own melanated people don't know, but the Democratic Party's heavy involvement with the Jim Crow legislation and the black codes and the history with segregation and all that. Yep. So let me get to this other part. I put, in order to be successful in the majority of cases, you have to be given an opportunity. There was an interview some of you all may have saw where Martin Luther King was being interviewed by NBC or MSNBC at the time before he was murdered, and he talked about a man cannot pull himself up by the bootstraps. But however, the majority of us black men were made obsolete. This elder was pointing out to me at the time, they deindustrialized. They used a combination of redlining, gentrification, removal of jobs, resources, police brutality, school to prison pipeline. They brought drugs into our community. That's why I brought up that movie called Kill the Messenger. Look up who Gary Webb was. Connect with the real Freeway Rick Ross. Look up information about that. His book. He was directly involved. That's who a lot of rappers that use their name. But there was a real Freeway Rick Ross who was caught up in, he found out when Gary Webb reached out to him years ago. And Gary Webb was a reporter from the San Jose Mercury News. They made a movie that was aired. I said this earlier for those that just may be listening or just are watching, and to re-emphasize, to look this up, research this, investigate it, to show proof they brought drugs into black neighborhoods. And this is why the city of Oakland acknowledged they gave incentives to black business owners for marijuana grow facilities, for cannabis facilities. I saw another separate documentary. I don't remember the name of it, by the way, but this is the reason they did that, to acknowledge the damage that they had done. So you see what reparations should have been passed nationwide a long time ago. And I have a separate video for that down the road. I'm just covering some of the aspects. This is tied in with some of the things, the taboo subjects that are not talked about in a lot of documentaries. There's a massive cover up. So integration didn't give us more power. It spread our power into the white community where we have less control and less influence. A little power in the white community looks like a lot in the black, but and we earlier, I did admit, we also, the elder pointed out to me, we also, unfortunately, we have to take responsibility of this ourselves. We abandoned our black businesses to patronize white businesses. That's why a lot of our black businesses, they collapsed, they went bankrupt, they're no more, unfortunately. uh, but that oftentimes doesn't get addressed or talked about, by the way. Another thing, this is not an era anymore that we live in modern day technology of physical labor of picking cotton or sharecropping. We're in an information era where technology is progressing, and many elders are not willing to share the information. Many of our people are not willing to adapt. I physically heard elders say they didn't properly do a good job passing down generational wealth to younger black people as well. But there's other reasons why I went over earlier that they don't even talk about. They refrain from when I went over the area doing reconstruction. The acknowledgement the older generation some made some mistakes, just like we the younger generation make some mistakes as well. So some, I'm not trying to like blame the older generation, but there's differences. In order for us to progress, whether we're young or old, we have to work with each other despite our differences. We need the elders in the black community to pass the education down. But unfortunately, many of them are selfish. They come from an aspect, oh, I got mines already, or I don't want to see you do better. I don't want to see you make it. I want to see you, I prefer you suffer because I suffer. So you have that mentality as well that keeps us stagnant from moving, progressing ahead. So that's about it. We're nearing the end. By the way, we're getting close to. I'm getting close. I'll acknowledge you all in the comment section if there are any additional messages. Speak now, forever hold your peace. If there's something you want me to bring up in the comment section, I'm on a different screen right now. I'm going over some of my notes. I have another video down the road which I'll cover the reparations specifically, why I am in favor of reparations. And I found out there's some activist groups that are currently fighting hard on behalf of the black community, by the way. And, Black History Month is very important. I acknowledged this earlier, which shouldn't be just relegated to 1 month because, when June comes around, you'll be hearing about the alphabet people, their community, their month. And they don't tell you how we play a vital role in their success that they had, but they don't never want to acknowledge or try to do things to empower our people because once they got what they got, other groups abandoned us and were selfish that used even the Black Panthers to help push their agenda. But then once they got what they got, they kicked us to the side and just ignored us. It's another reason why a lot of black men feel like they were by themselves or they were harmed and not the restitution was not properly addressed. It's like I give the example when you get into a car accident and when, let's say, the person who was at fault, they are responsible for the party that was damaged. That's why the party that was damaged can legally sue for damages, for example. And that's why many states require uh, people who travel to have insurance in case these unfortunate events happen. But unfortunately, African American community, and I would say black men specifically, I support reparations. The damage, these grievances have not been properly addressed because when the entitlement programs were passed, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and Lyndon Baines Johnson said, I'll have those N-words voting Democrat for the next 200 years, that only put a Band-Aid on things. That didn't properly address, which the elder stated to me, that's when reparations should have been passed at the time. And before Martin Luther King passed away, there's a famous quote that he quoted on record. He said, I'm afraid I'm leading my people into a burning house. He saw later on down the road and he got a better understanding of what was going on. But by that time, it was pretty much too late. And some of you guys know who they used the people to replace him, the Boule people, to take his place. That some are still around, and they have never properly addressed addressed our grievances and properly repaired the damage that only put a band-aid on things. The United States government, and I went over historically during a period of Reconstruction. I was after slavery. The soldiers, black soldiers who fought for the Union that defeated the South in the Civil War, were promised 40 acres and a mule, and their land was redistributed. They were not given their 40 acres, was the equivalent. That's where we get reparations derived from. We were not properly compensated with land and monetarily compensation. There was groups that did studies of how every African-American family, foundational Black Americans here in America, are owed upwards of $300,000 a piece, because other groups were compensated for things far less done to them versus our people. Other groups were historically compensated, by the way, and there's records on that. Dr. Claude Anderson and others researched, and there's other historians as well. You have to do your own research. But out of all these atrocities, overall, foundational Black Americans were not compensated. And there's documentaries and studies that are done where each family, Black families, at least owe upwards over $300,000. And that would be a start, monetarily compensation. So I'm almost finished, pretty much. Okay, that's it. The title of this video is what Black History Documentaries Won't Reveal to You, a Massive Cover-Up. I apologize for the pauses at times. I was reading from my notes. By the way, it's going over some information from my notes. I didn't want to talk about, can get into other subjects, but much of what I covered, I hope I placed the emphasis. You guys can see the Democratic Party oftentimes tries to frown away from their involvement in voting for the legislation and passing the legislation of the Jim Crow laws and the Black codes, or known as the slave codes. And as late after slavery as the late 1800s, you can look up. It should still be on Wikipedia and other websites to back up the accuracy of that if you question the validity behind what I've gone over. And I'm going to go over. So in conclusion, if any Democratic or progressive candidate or Republican candidate running for president or any public office, whether locally, statewide, who do not adamantly support reparations, then I encourage Black people to not support them. And certainly don't vote for them, because seriously, we need to reevaluate who we support down the road. So my final statement in conclusion of this video, before I'm going to go to the comment section to acknowledge you guys. In conclusion, if any Democratic, progressive candidate or Republican candidate running for president does not adamantly support reparations, from what I went over, then I encourage Black people to not support them, and certainly don't vote for them, because we seriously need to reevaluate who we support down the road. Now, I'm not saying, I do understand you have what some don't like to say, lesser of two evils, or some that you have as your better option. By the way, that it's just, it is for what it is. You just have no other options. But you seriously, if you're in smaller areas, you definitely need to reevaluate who you support, and you need to bring this issue to the forefront. Since politicians are losing the Black vote because they can't keep promising the same thing over and over. So be careful. At the same time, some politicians are also using this reparations promise to keep the Black vote, or whatever, who didn't originally support reparations, even some Black politicians, who some of y'all say, yes, we can, that didn't, but told you they was the president for everybody else. But they won't tell you that Dr. Claude Anderson, behind the scenes, during his both terms he had in office, he ignored his plight for reparations and said he was aware that they got the documents and received them and ignored reparations. But now he's saying he supports it. So you can read between the lines who I'm talking about. I didn't say the name, but just However, what I'm also saying to my fellow melanated people, you need to hold them accountable this time and make sure they deliver. That's if you are a registered voter. It's your duty, and it's their duty to repair the damage. Remember, the politicians work for we the people. We have to remember they hold public office. It isn't the other way around where they have the power because they make all this money and they're passing, raising taxes to give themselves a pay raise. They are supposed to work for we the people. So my message to them, whether Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever, repair the damage immediately or no justice, no peace. We've seen this time and time again where candidates have promised to help the African-American community. However, the candidates we support double cross us and champion another cause. Or furthermore, they don't take an effort like they said they would, and legislatures act silent on this issue. This is a major issue and should be for heading forward in the future 2024 candidates moving forward down the road. This needs to be addressed immediately to repair the damage that was done to us as a whole Black community, and is just as important as prison reform or urban revitalization. The attempt to repair the damage needs to be done ASAP. As we know, they can't totally fix the wrongs they've done to us. So the least you can do, because I know some white people try to say, well, we weren't born yet. We weren't alive yet during that time. Okay, I understand that. But you need to address this ASAP and totally fix the wrongs. Because Martin Luther King, who you all like to quote always, he supported reparations, by the way. Other ethnic groups receive reparations as well. So Black people unapologetically deserve it. To not support legislation to help repair the damage caused by slavery / Jim Crow, which was voted by the Democratic Party, by the way, happens, you would be on the wrong side of history. But it still doesn't matter which political party you belong to. This is why I've laid out you should support reparations. But I have a separate video down the road. I want to thank you guys for watching. I'm going to get ready to shut things down. Okay, it looks like no one else has joined, and I see that's why we haven't gotten a lot of people in here. But my hardcore subscribers, I appreciate you all that do rock with me, that appreciate this topic. Thank you for joining. Until next time, Dorsey's Resource, the marathon will continue. Legends never die. They stay in our hearts. Oh, I forgot, if you want to follow me on social media, you can follow me. I'm on Facebook at Dorsey's Resource. I'm on Twitter at Dorsey's Resource. I'm on Rumble at Dorsey's Resource. And by the way, I have may put the link to my Rumble video, a couple videos that have been removed by YouTube in the description box to check them out. It's a must see. One of them you're going to like, probably both of them. I'm going to put in the description box. If you want to follow me, I'm also on Parler at Dorsey's Resource. I'm on True Social at Dorsey's Resource as well. Remember, these are other platforms. In case something happens over here as a backup, I recommend you guys have a backup. In case, cancel culture is running rampant. We don't know how bad things can get, no matter what political affiliations or what side you have. You should have a backup. So I'm your host, John Dorsey. Appreciate you guys that continue to rock with me, join me. Until next time, the fight will continue. Marathon will continue once again. Legends never die. They stay in our hearts. Peace. I'm out.